Welcome, Elite Myrmidons, to the first ever deep dive episode for Greek Mythology Retold. In these episodes, I will take you into the meat and bones, the heart and soul of individual essays, articles, and books I've researched on Greek mythology and the Trojan War for my book series and the Greek Mythology Retold podcast. If you love Greek myth and the Trojan War, you're in the right place. To christen this venture, I begin with something that profoundly affected my point of view of the Trojan War and Achilles. Everyone wants to know about Achilles, and the question most often discussed on the boards and on social media platforms, especially since Madeline Miller's book, The Song of Achilles, was published a decade ago, is, were Achilles and Patroclus lovers? Personally, I don't think so, but in saying that, I would also add that I didn't always think that. After I read Song of Achilles, I thought, it really could be. But after continued reading and researching for my own projects, I changed my mind from that first thought. And it's important to remember, I think, that with mythology, we're going to have a variety of interpretations, especially over time and depending on the sources that you consult and the society and culture that the sources are coming from. All of those things influence whatever a final interpretation would be, including, how I interpret it or how I came to interpret it myself. And really that myths are malleable. They are not set in stone, and there is no really one right or wrong way to interpret events or situations where there is no clear-cut, explicit explanation for something, right? So just keep that in mind. I took the more militaristic approach, and let me explain. That brings me to Dr. Dué's essay and Dr. Shea's book, Achilles in Vietnam. But this deep dive is really going to be focusing on Dr. Casey Dué Hackney's essay. This work made me step back and think about Achilles in a military capacity, his role as a military leader, and the responsibilities and bonds that would have developed because of that. By ignoring this layer, we are in fact stripping Achilles of what and who he primarily was, a combat veteran, a warrior. And by looking at Achilles and his relationship with Patroclus through the hyper-focused lens of his sexuality was, for me in the end, much more limiting than revelatory. This is part 1 of 2, as we deep dive into Dr. Casey Dué Hackney and Dr. Mary Ebbitt's essay, Mother in Arms, Soldiers, Emotional Bonds, and Homeric Similes. I've mentioned this paper in a few Greek Mythology Retold podcasts, but now we're going to go all in. Dr. Dué is the program director for classical studies at the University of Houston. She earned her PhD at Harvard University in 2001. Her recent publications on Homer are of particular interest to me, namely the essay on the Homeric multitext, Achilles Unbound, and her Homeric variations on a lament by Briseis. But this work on the mothering bonds of soldiers and Homeric similes is amazing. It really blew me away and had a profound effect on how I developed Achilles as a character and his relationship with Patroclus. She begins with the modern soldier, an interview on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, whose guest was Sergeant First Class Leroy Petrie. He received the Congressional Medal of Honor for what he'd done in Afghanistan. In the interview, Sergeant Petrie said, quote, "We are all brothers out there." And he said he'd never give up on any of his men, that he felt about his men the way a bird caring for its young feels. What I find interesting here is the comparison that Sergeant Petrie makes is one of a parental role, even though he uses the familial term of brother. In the first section of Dr. Dué's essay titled Achilles and the Mother Bird Reconsidered, she outlines how and why the simile of the mother bird is relevant to Achilles and the relationship he has with Patroclus and his Myrmidons. In Book 9 of the Iliad, Achilles makes a comparison between himself and a mother bird, which is very similar to the way Sergeant Petrie describes his feelings toward his men. By Book 9, Agamemnon has already taken Briseis, and Achilles feels betrayed and humiliated, and the Greeks are losing and they want Achilles back in the fight. His response in Book 9, lines 323 through 326 is this: "Like a bird that brings food to her fledgling young in her bill whenever she finds any, even if she herself fares poorly, so I passed sleepless nights and many bloody days in battle, contending with men for the sake of their wives." This simile shows us that Achilles feels that his primary concern all these years has been for his men and not himself. Look at the simile. The mother bird brings back food even if she fares poorly. He's saying that he is taking care of his men even to the detriment of himself. He has suffered all these years, fighting for men because they had a home to return to. He's hinting that perhaps he doesn't, as he's not properly married, but is also reminding the Greeks of his feelings for Briseis because he says emphatically that she's the wife of his heart, and at the hands of Agamemnon, even a small comfort has been stripped from him, adding emotional pain to his humiliation. I also find it probable that this is a big dig at Agamemnon as well, because Achilles sees him as being selfishly motivated. Achilles is also reminding everyone he's sacrificed his sleep, has blood on his hands for the sake of everyone else, but not himself. Dué points out that Achilles is drawing a parallel between the suffering of mothers and his suffering. She also points out that by using the mother bird imagery, Achilles is connecting his pain to that of mothers, which is ironic considering the pain he has caused by killing untold numbers of men, widowing and orphaning how many we have no idea. Dué then talks about another mother bird and war grief connection in Euripides' play The Trojan Women. After Troy is sacked, the Trojan women are taken prisoner, and Hecuba, the former queen of Troy, speaks up about the wretched state of affairs that she finds herself in. She's basically a slave before Agamemnon's tents. She says, "Like some mother bird that over her fledgling screams, so I will lead off the shout, the song and dance, not the same as I had once conducted." Here is another reference to a grieving mother figure using the mother bird simile. Dué points out that the mother bird reference would have resonated with an ancient audience, and that Achilles' use of it would have been significant. Also, that in retrospect, she points out both modern and ancient soldiers used the same simile, so there must be a particular kind of bond between warriors that transcends time. By referencing a mother bird, it also conjures up the mother archetype to describe what soldiers feel in war, the bond relationship that they develop in battle. Dué makes a significant point here that Achilles and Sergeant Petrie are not quite in the same boat. Achilles is a prince who didn't take the oath of Tyndareus and actually was free to leave combat. He was free to withdraw from battle, and he threatened to go home, and if he did, there was really nothing Agamemnon could do about it. Agamemnon can't even force him to fight, hence the messengers back and forth begging Achilles, and later Patroclus. But Sergeant Petrie isn't free to leave. He's bound to remain in Afghanistan by contract. He doesn't have the luxury to say, "Fuck it, I'm out." Despite whatever hardships he and his men face, he has to remain for the duration. At this point, she brings in Jonathan Shea's book, Achilles in Vietnam, to begin making the strong correlation between soldiers across time. Homer alongside Shea's work with Vietnam vets. In his book, Shea talks about his work with veterans and the bonds they developed because of shared combat trauma and deprivations. He says, "The terror and privations of combat bonds men in a passion of care that the word brother only partly captures. Men become mothers to one another in combat. the grief and rage that they experience when a special comrade is killed appear virtually identical to that of a child suddenly orphaned, and they feel that the mother within them has died with the friend. And this got me to thinking. After 9 years of fighting together, the bond would be intense. That's like going through 9 tours of Vietnam or 9 tours in Afghanistan. So the question is, are these bonds sexual or emotional? And that's really what I focus on. The 2 reoccurring words used to describe the bond between soldiers is brother and mother. Both are familial, but reference very different family dynamics. Soldiers use the term brother, but they feel motherly. A brother is someone that you do things with, a blood bond. But a mother is someone who cares with her heart, protects you ferociously, like a mother bear. Neither of these descriptions from the mouths of warriors, ancient or modern, speak to sexuality, but they do speak to an intense, close, loving, and unbreakable bond. Now, going back to the mother bird simile, we can see Achilles has placed himself in the role of the mother in relation to his men, and Patroclus, who can be seen as the special comrade. According to Dr. Shea, it's typical for combat soldiers to have a special comrade, someone they turn to or admire or feel they need to protect. It's also common for a unit to recognize that person or that relationship bond and to honor it. Dr. Dué talks about how Achilles understood his role as protector of Patroclus and, after his death, would have been racked by guilt because of all the Myrmidons. Patroclus, as his special comrade, should have been the one he protected. And without him at his side, Patroclus was doomed. And that makes me think about the fact that for 9 years, Patroclus has never gone into battle without Achilles at his side. He has literally been protected by Achilles' presence all this time. No one could defeat him. Now, getting Achilles to agree to let him use his armor and trick the Trojans would mean for the first time that he was going to face battle and perhaps death alone, unprotected. And perhaps Achilles knew this better than anyone. He did warn Patroclus not to press Hector directly and not to chase him too close to Trojan territory. So maybe in the warning we see a little trepidation on Achilles' behalf because as a, quote, mothering figure, he would be rightly worried about what could go wrong. He would be more aware of the danger Patroclus faced without him, much the way a mother is aware of possible danger that a child is not aware of due to lack of experience for whatever the circumstance. After Patroclus dies, Achilles knows he has nothing to lose but his life. He has faced this decision, one he knew he was going to have to make. He could not let Patroclus' death go unavenged, and by diving back into the war, any hope of returning home would be gone. He knew that the moment he re-engaged in the war, he would die soon after. Thetis has told him this more than once. The death of the special comrade, in this case Patroclus, would be the final straw for Achilles to return to battle, where he would kill Hector and then die in that order. Dué also mentions that the mother bird reference is more like a traditional Greek mother's lament, which were expressions of grief and sorrow, then anger, and then revenge. Along the lines of mothering, Dué addresses Patroclus' tearful begging of Achilles to rejoin the now desperate battle in Book 16 of the Iliad. So far, we've seen Homer use the parent-child connection, and that continues in Book 16. When Patroclus enters Achilles' tent, he is weeping for the tremendous loss of life that has already happened and for the apparent impending doom of all the Greeks because Hector and his army have breached the barricade around the Greek camp. Greek ships are actually on fire. Their only way to return home is threatened with obliteration. Achilles asks, "Why are you crying, Patroclus, like an oblivious girl who, running along with her mother, begs to be picked up, grabbing onto her robe, and she hinders her as she is trying to go, and tearfully looks at her in order that she be picked up?" Again we see the parent-child relationship being used. Achilles as the protector over Patroclus. Digging deep into the Greek word nepios, which is here translated as oblivious, it's often seen as foolish, but according to Dué's notes, she informs that Susan Edmonds' 1990 work showed that the word, quote, more accurately conveys the lack of awareness common to infants and young children. And so then what we are really talking about is not that Patroclus is being cast as literally a little girl in Achilles' eyes, or childlike as in childish and immature, right? What we are seeing is a validation that Achilles sees himself as the mothering figure, whether it's as a mother bird or a mother protecting her vulnerable young. We can also see this as Patroclus being unaware that when he goes into battle, he is going to his death. He is innocent of his fate, whereas Achilles has foreknowledge of his. Although he is also unaware of Patroclus, but again, he is more likely to be more aware of how he has protected Patroclus over the years, just as many children are unaware of situations where their parents protected them. Dué brings up an article written by Kathy Gaka in 2008 where Gaka dissects this mother-daughter simile. She argues that the lines in Book 16, 7 through 10 take place close to the fall of Troy that we know is coming, and that this foreshadows the fate that will soon befall the Trojan women. Now, in this context, then, the mother and daughter are on the verge of being taken captive. There may be a sliver of a window to escape for the mother, but the girl cannot keep up with her mother. She cries, begging to be picked up, and we know that the mother will stop and pick her up, because what loving mother would leave behind her child to save herself? However, this act of selflessness means the mother won't be able to escape or hide, being encumbered by a smaller child that she has to carry. And by doing this out of love, she seals both their fates. They will both be captured and enslaved or killed. This is important because these lines directly precede Achilles relinquishing his armor to Patroclus, or the mother picking up the girl. Giving in to the child will bring death to both. I'd also like to add that we know, and the ancient audience also knew, that Zeus had already declared Achilles safe from death until Patroclus is killed. Patroclus' tears, which flowed like a spring flowed down the face of a rock, is actually another mother comparison. Dué notes that these lines are referring to Niobe's tears, Niobe who'd been turned into a weeping rock by Apollo and Artemis because she had bragged that she was a better mother than Leto, their mother. This speaks to a profound grief and unending sorrow, as when your heart is plucked from your chest and the hollowness is a pain that will never cease. I see Patroclus' request in the Iliad for his ashes to be buried with Achilles fitting into this kind of grief and loss. These mothering similes used by Homer to describe and elaborate on Achilles' relationship with Patroclus are very much like any other Greek mother's lament. First, there is the expression of sorrow and grief, and then anger, and finally revenge. This is the pattern we see with Achilles. When Achilles first hears of Patroclus' death by Eurylochus, he breaks down and he sobs. You can imagine the scene, right? The strongest, proudest warrior reduced to sorrowful weeping, so grief-stricken that he reaches for a blade to end his life, and Eurylochus holds his wrists. Achilles now totally gives in to his pain. He tears his hair out and he pours ashes over his head. This is his initial grief. Then he becomes angry that Patroclus didn't listen to him and that Hector has his armor now and he can't go into battle. He bemoans that Ajax is in battle because Ajax's gear is the only armor that could possibly fit him. Thetis has promised to bring him new armor the next day. He then puts aside his anger with Agamemnon and he makes up with him and the rest of the Greeks, and they all want to feast and eat and refresh before they re-engage the the Trojans, but Achilles is now chomping at the bit. He refuses to eat and he just wants to get to war. Once he enters the field, he is so stunning and terrifying that the Trojans cower. Achilles now becomes a killing machine, revenge mode times 10. He kills so many Trojans, the river runs red with blood, so much that the river itself rises up to fight Achilles. He won't be satisfied until the object of his hate, born of a deep grief, is killed. We know that he eventually battles Hector, kills him, and defaces and mutilates the corpse. To wrap up this section of Dué's essay, she punctuates that the mother bird simile evoked an image of mothers and war grief an ancient audience would have been well aware of, kind of like us saying, "Oh, that's a Trojan horse," or "Oh, he's such a Romeo." We know the entire context and don't need further elaboration. So the mother bird simile is a way for Homer to connect Achilles' grief to suffering mothers who've lost children, and war grief. The simile foreshadows what will come. Many in the ancient audience would have already known the end. Achilles' grief over Patroclus is clearly linked to a mother's grief over losing a child. This fits with the modern soldiers' expressions as well, that they feel as mothers to their men. It's also linking Achilles' sorrow, ironically, to mothers. Achilles must be aware as he says the words that he himself has caused the same intense grief in countless women as he is feeling over the loss of his special comrade whom he was supposed to protect but didn't. He suffers as he himself has caused suffering. Okay, that is the end of the first part of Dr. Dué's essay. If you'd like to hear more, click on part 2 and let's go Myrmidons.